So in this video I start by inserting a cylinder. I just adjust a few settings like how many faces there are, its diameter and so on. I'm renaming it, moving it around, changing its size. Eventually get into edit mode and do some loop cuts. Turning on my screencast keys so you can see in the bottom left the shortcut keys that I'm hitting, so Control R, and then I scrolled up on the mouse wheel. I'm adjusting the fall off so that it rounds to the shape that I want. So now that I have a cylinder with a almost bullet-like front face, I'm splitting it and then deciding to mirror the outboard, so I only really have to model one side. I incorrectly deleted the faces instead of the vertices. Right, so now we have a mirror modifier on, and then I'm splitting it open so that the bottom point of the outboard can come from this section. There's some strange leftover pieces there that I'm deleting. It's putting in a loop cut so when the subdivision surface applies, then I won't get huge problems. So just extruding and adjusting. But what I found is that there's a strange face that's turned inside out, and you can see that in wireframe view. So I had to go to wireframe to find the vertice that was inside out. And then I decide that I just don't need that front section anyway, and I delete it. Just trying to space out the vertices here. And then don't need that face. Filling in the gaps, bringing them together, turning clipping on so it holds together. Put in a loop cut. More loop cuts so that the shape will essentially maintain its appearance once I turn subdivision surface on. I'm just extruding individual vertices and pulling them across to the middle. I'm trying to keep as many faces as I can four-sided. That's why I'm mucking about with subdividing some of those sections. So there's subdivision surface. I put in a loop cut so that it doesn't, I guess, swell in that bottom fin, I guess. Here I am about to pull this apart, so to turn clipping off. If I don't turn clipping off, then you can't separate the mirror. I'm attempting to rotate. I've just left the bottom vertices alone. And it looks a little strange there with the mirror pulling those pieces apart. So now extruding, and then I scale in the vertical axis, so SZ0. Scaling and moving. Turning off subdivision just to get a good idea as to how my geometry is behaving. So now it gets to some tricky parts where there are some sections sticking out sideways. So I'm tilting my view around to have a look at the rear view of the other outboard, or the other outboard reference picture. Just filling in some gaps, so extrude, pull to the middle. I need a loop cut here, because if I just extruded and pulled to the middle, it would be blocky and square. So I had to rip in that part, I think. And then I'm moving it and then merge by distance. So I've got the vertices very close to each other. There I am thinking about trying to make things four-sided, but really didn't work so well. So I can see from the picture that it's much wider at that section, so I'm highlighting and pulling apart. But of course clipping was off, so to pull those pieces back together to meet in the middle. Again, just continuing on with shaping, needing some loop cuts just to make the shape correct, so I'll come back with any commentary that might be needed later on. At this point, I'd like to stress the importance of looking at reference pictures from both sides. I've only got from the back and from the side. It would be great to have one from the front, but I don't have one of those. So I'm just making adjustments here to get the width correct. In this place here, I'm trying to fill in the face, but what I'm noticing is, as I extrude and scale, there's been a really strange shape forming. It's just not scaling quite as it normally does. I think it's to do with my really odd number of vertices near the bottom. So essentially I attempt to put in a circle through the middle, and I couldn't get the 3D cursor where I wanted, so essentially I think I filled in one edge, subdivided it, and then put the 3D cursor where that line was. So now I've got the 3D cursor where I want it, exactly in the middle. I insert a circle, I scale it down, and I adjust the right number of vertices. And of course I got one too many, so I had to do the circle twice. And I highlighted on the far side, so that was a little annoying. So there we go, we've got our circles. I'm doing a little count to make sure everything matches up, and then I try to bridge edge loops. But of course counting helps. I didn't count correctly, so I just insert and just decrease the number of vertices because I didn't count properly. So I option click and then shift option click, and then I tried to merge and they didn't want to merge properly, so I just had to manually fill. I did one and then pushed F many times and it filled in the rest. Just fixing up the geometry here, and it looks a little bit of a dog's breakfast, getting rid of the unneeded lines. I can see that it's not a flat plane, so I'm just pushing it around. It looks a little bit like a spider's web, I guess. So I grab scale Y0 return, so it's all flat now. And just minor adjustments. I'm making extensive use of loop cuts, and then just here I'm comparing what I've made to the reference image. Grabbing the top section, extruding and scaling. I'm flicking back and forth between the side view and front view, largely just to keep everything as close to my reference picture as possible. Some of the scaling put the vertices in strange places, so I'm just edge sliding some of these vertices into sensible places. It's a good idea to keep doing that as you go, otherwise you'll end up with everything in strange places and it'll just be too big of a job to fix and get right. So tidy it up as you go. It's a bit like cooking, clean the kitchen as you go. At this point I'm faced with a decision, and I'm ignoring a lot of the brackets and mounting sections of the outboard. I'm going to add those in later. I just want the main engine part to be made. Techniques that I'm using throughout this modeling process, there's nothing super challenging here. All I'm doing just at this place is copying one of the reference images and just adjusting the angle so I could sort of see it from a slightly different view. I don't know how useful it was in the end, but I thought it was a good idea at the time. So proportional editing, just getting the fall off right. Sometimes it's easier to do it one section at a time, extruding some parts, filling them in, and then when the shape doesn't quite sit right with subdivision surface on, then adjustments, usually with loop cuts. That's my preferred method. You can use edge creasing and so on. I just find loop cuts to be far more reliable. I'm trying in this place to get good edge flow. I just found it a little too difficult in that place. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm just checking the edge flow at the moment. There's certainly better people at that sort of stuff than me, so I just found out when some of that wasn't working. I just deleted some of the edges so it wouldn't be such a big deal. There's less detail in this section, so I can make much larger progress. Just pushing and pulling the vertices so that it matches the reference picture, adding in loop cuts to make the pinch work a little better. Didn't get it wide enough, so I'm highlighting, and then I'm going to scale, but I'm using proportional editing. You'll notice the circle adjusting there. So if you haven't got proportional editing on, the shortcut key is O. And it's a lot of repeating the same techniques: extruding, rotating, scaling, loop cuts. So I'd made some adjustments and pull on some faces. I'm spreading out some of the vertices just here so that it'll look much smoother when I look at it later on. If the vertices from your loop cuts are really bunched, then it'll look quite pinched. You can kind of see on the side, down in the bottom of the screen, it looks a little pinched. So at this point I'm sort of squeezing the top of the outboard in just to match the shape, and then once just pinching doesn't do it, I'm filling in the shapes. Just got to make sure you highlight the right parts. One section at a time, I think I'm grabbing a vertex and then extruding that single vertex in, highlighting all around and filling in the face. F to fill. So here it's largely done, just pushing and pulling a few pieces around so that the mesh looks as good as possible. Looking around for anything obvious that needs fixing. So just comparing what I've made with my reference images, there are some parts missing. I'll add them later. But largely the main body of the outboard is made, and I'm going to add in a material. So I made a new slot and then clicked new So it's got a material 001. I give it a name. And then I double click on the base color and then use the eyedropper and just take the color straight from the reference picture. And then I clicked assign, and if we have a look under material preview, I also reduced the roughness to give it a good shine. And then I put in the faces to be smooth shading, and then having a closer look. That far side color without the highlight looks quite nice. And then I rendered it, just had a simple keyframe rotating 180 degrees. Pretty good end point. I'll do all the other parts in a different video. Some paintwork and perhaps some vents and some other little details to make it look a little more real. I'll show that in the next video.